You are barren. I can't marry you. I want children. Those words tore through me like a blade, clean, sharp, final. I stood there, in the middle of his one-bedroom apartment in Sydney, blinking back tears that stung like acid behind my eyelids. The journey from Atlanta had taken almost 12 hours. 12 hours in the air and a lifetime of dreams in my heart. I had planned it all, how I'd surprise him, how we'd spend the weekend holding each other, how we'd talk about the life we had imagined for almost a decade. But instead, I stood frozen, betrayed and bare before the man I had loved since I was 23. His face was blank, but his voice had trembled. He couldn't even look me in the eye. He just kept saying it, like repetition would make it logical. You are barren. As if I didn't already know. As if I hadn't lived with that fear every single day since that night we made the worst decision of our lives. As if it wasn't our child we terminated. Our mistake. Our trauma. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. My lips quivered, but no sound came out. My knees buckled beneath me, and I sank into his couch, feeling like the floor beneath me had opened and swallowed every breath I had. I don't remember how I got to the airport. I don't remember how I got back to the United States. But I remember the silence. That cruel, echoing silence on the flight, where every cry inside me got louder with each mile I flew away from him. I cried every night for months. My body was whole, but my spirit was cracked in places too deep to reach. I begged. I pleaded. I texted him long, emotional messages I knew he was reading, and ignoring. 1 year later, I saw his wedding photos online. He had married someone else. A fertile woman, I assumed. I lay in bed for 3 days after that, lights off, blinds drawn, my phone face down. Love had died for me that week. Or maybe it had been dying slowly, and that was just the final breath. But God has a way of rewriting stories. Because 8 years later, I was married. To a man who loved me wholly, barrenness or not. And I had a son. And a daughter on the way. And then, one day, a file landed on my desk. A patient from Australia. His name? James. And that was the day my quiet revenge began. My name is Vera, and I am 38 years old. If anyone had told me that one day I would become a nephrologist managing a renal center built by my husband in the United States, I might have smiled politely but doubted it deep down. Not because I wasn't smart or driven, but because my life had taken so many turns that I wasn't sure which direction I would end up facing. But before the heartbreak, before the white coats, hospital corridors, and soft thuds of ultrasound machines, there was the girl I used to be. I was just 23. A medical student in my second year at the University of Lagos. I was bright-eyed, ambitious, and obsessed with the future. And then I met James. He was a second-year law student, tall, charming, always dressed like he had a courtroom waiting for him somewhere. I still remember the day I first noticed him. I was at the library, struggling through a physiology textbook that looked more like Greek than English. He was sitting beside me, glanced at the title of my book, and smiled. "Let me guess, med student?" he said. I looked up, slightly annoyed, but something about his smile disarmed me. "Yes," I replied, my voice uncertain. "I thought so. You people are always buried in that monstrous textbook," he said, gesturing to my book. "I'm James." He extended his hand with that kind of confidence that wasn't arrogance, just calm assurance. I shook his hand. That was how it began. We started running into each other more often after that, at the library, during campus events. He'd bring me snacks when I studied late. He made me laugh when I was overwhelmed by academic stress. Before long, it became more than friendship. He had this way of making me feel seen, not just from my brain, but from my heart. He listened. He cared. And slowly, I fell in love. Our relationship blossomed like spring after a long harmattan. We were that couple everyone admired. The power duo of law and medicine. He'd walk me to class, hold my bag while I bought food, and sometimes even help me memorize anatomy terms. He made me feel like I could breathe, even when school was suffocating. We talked about the future, our careers, our dreams, where we'd live, how many children we'd have. I wish I could erase all that from my memory. It was in my 4th year that everything changed. I missed my period. I thought it was stress. But 2 weeks turned into 4, and then came the test. Positive. I remember holding the test kit with trembling hands in my room, as if staring at it long enough would change the result. My world spun. I couldn't breathe. The air in the room felt heavier than lead. When I told James, he didn't shout or panic. He just sat there in silence, rubbing his chin, looking like someone trying to solve a complex legal puzzle. "What are we going to do?" I whispered, the tears already forming. He stood up and pulled me into a hug. "We'll get through this. I promise." That night, we talked about everything, our parents, school, our dreams. We both agreed we weren't ready to be parents. Our parents would disown us. My father was a deacon, strict and conservative. My mother would collapse from shame. His own family would see me as a distraction, a mistake. And so, we made the worst decision of our lives. A week later, he found an unlicensed nurse who was known to fix problems. She operated from the back room of a cramped building somewhere I forced myself to forget. I was scared, but James held my hand and told me it would be fine. It wasn't. I started bleeding heavily after the process. The pain was excruciating. I can't forget what the nurse said after the process. She said the process had complications and that my womb might have been damaged. She said it coldly, like someone reading weather news. "You might not be able to conceive in the future." Maybe. Maybe not. I felt like my life ended that day. But James, he was my lifeline. He said, "It doesn't matter if we have kids or not. I'm not going anywhere." And I believed him. The weeks following the termination were the darkest of my life. I barely had the strength to get out of bed. My body was weak from the bleeding, and my spirit was fractured beyond words. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the cold face of that unlicensed nurse, her gloves stained, her hands careless, her voice flat when she told me what she had done. I remember the pain. The cramps. The fevers. The fear that I would never be whole again. But worse than all of that was the shame, the deep, heavy shame that lived in my bones. I hated myself for making that choice, for agreeing to end the life inside me. But I also knew we weren't ready. We couldn't be. James visited every day. He brought soup, sat with me for hours, sometimes without saying a word. One evening, I looked at him through blurry eyes and asked the question that had haunted me since that day: what if I can't ever have children again? He took my hand in both of his and kissed my fingers gently. His voice was firm. "Then we adopt. Or we don't. But I'm not leaving you, Vera. You are not your womb. You are my heart." I believed him. God, I wanted to believe him so badly. Because if I couldn't trust his promise, then what did I have left? We got stronger together. After I recovered, we poured ourselves into school. He was rounding up his final year. I was preparing for my board exams. In many ways, our love deepened after the tragedy. It became a kind of shelter, something we crawled into when the world outside felt too cruel. We made plans. We talked about moving abroad together. He applied for international law programs and was offered a full scholarship in Melbourne, Australia. I got into a rigorous but rewarding medical residency in Atlanta, USA. I don't care where we are, he said, clinking his glass to mine. We'll make it work. Lagos to Melbourne to Atlanta. We're bigger than distance, he said as we both prepared to leave for the different countries. I smiled, but something inside me sank. Because deep down, I knew love needed more than promises. Our parents were proud, unaware of what we had gone through to get to that moment. We never told them about the pregnancy. Some truths are just too heavy for certain ears. We left Nigeria on the same day. I boarded my flight to Atlanta in the morning. He boarded his to Melbourne in the afternoon. We held each other for what felt like eternity at the airport. I will marry you, he whispered in my ear before we parted. I swear it. And I flew off with my whole heart tied to those words. Atlanta was cold, in both weather and culture. Everything moved too fast. The people were polite but distant. My residency was brutal, 16-hour shifts, sleepless nights, endless studying. But I coped. Because every night, I'd open my phone and see a voice note or text from James. He'd tell me about Melbourne, how he hated Vegemite, how he was adjusting to the accent, how the law school was killing him softly. He sent me pictures from his part-time job at a legal clinic, selfies at the beach, photos of random street art. I sent him pictures of my scrubs, tired but smiling after a 24-hour shift. We were surviving. We were loving. We were holding on. Every holiday, we planned visits. He came to the US one December. We stayed in my apartment in Brooklyn and enjoyed every bit of the moment. I flew to Melbourne the following year. He picked me up at the airport holding a cardboard sign that said, "Future Mrs. James." We laughed. We loved. We even looked at engagement rings. But looking back now, I should have known. Something had started to shift in him. After that visit, the calls became shorter. The texts lost their warmth. When I brought up children, he became quiet. I didn't think much of it at first. We were both exhausted. Maybe he was just overwhelmed. But my gut whispered something I didn't want to hear, that love was slowly leaking out of the seams. Then came the last visit. The very last one. I had planned it as a surprise. I wanted to surprise him. I even got a new dress. I wore it on the flight, red, his favorite color. When he opened the door in Melbourne, he looked surprised to see me. Vera, I hugged him, but he hugged me back like someone embracing a memory, not a future. The apartment was different. Colder. Sparse. We didn't even eat dinner before he sat me down and said he wanted us to talk about something. I can't remember everything he said, but these words kept ringing in my ears. You are barren. I can't marry you. I want children. My heart stopped. Literally. I felt it stutter. I'm sorry, he added. But I've thought about this. I can't pretend anymore. That's the thing about heartbreak, it's not the loud moments that break you. It's the quiet ones. The moments when someone you love looks you in the eye and tells you you're not enough. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just stared at him, wondering how a man who once kissed my scars could now use them against me. That night I didn't sleep. And the following morning, I left. With the wind knocked out of my soul. The flight from Melbourne back to Atlanta felt like a blur. I remember staring out the window, watching clouds float beneath me, but my mind was frozen somewhere between denial and devastation. My body was present, but everything else, my heart, my hope, my faith and love, had been left in that cold apartment in Australia. I didn't cry on the plane. I couldn't. The shock was too fresh, too raw, too unreal. But the moment I stepped back into my apartment in Atlanta, where his pictures still sat on my shelf, where my phone still held his voicemails, where every corner of my life still had his name etched into it, I collapsed. I screamed into my pillow until my throat burned. I sobbed until my stomach ached. And then, I went silent. For weeks, I moved like a ghost. I went to work, I came back, I ate barely enough to keep standing. My colleagues noticed, of course, but no one asked too many questions. Everyone in medicine is exhausted, so sadness hides well among us. But mine was deeper. Mine was betrayal in its purest form. He had looked me in the eye and thrown the one thing I feared most back at me like it was a flaw I chose, like I had asked to bleed out that day, like I had begged to be scarred forever by the decision we both made. The same man who had promised, "You're more than your womb," now said I wasn't enough because of it. I wrote him long messages I never sent. I listened to old voice notes, torturing myself with the sound of his laughter. I even dialed his number once, but I hung up before it rang. And then, a year later, it happened. I was scrolling through Facebook during my lunch break when I saw his wedding pictures. James and his new bride, smiling under a tree, gold rings glinting in the sun. Her arms wrapped around his. Her face glowing with joy. The caption read, "Forever started today." My heart stopped. My legs buckled. I dropped my lunch and rushed into the restroom and locked the door behind me. I slid to the floor, clutching my stomach as if the pain could be squeezed out like poison. I wailed into my palms, loud, broken, wounded. That night, I unfollowed him. I deleted his number. I removed every photo. But the memories stayed. They always do. Healing was not linear. Some days I felt strong, like I could walk into any room and not flinch at the thought of him. Other days, I crumbled at the sound of his name. I tried dating again, but every conversation reminded me of what I had lost. I threw myself deeper into work, patients, charts, lab results. Their suffering became my anchor, their healing my distraction. I delved into nephrology and rose through the ranks faster than anyone expected. Medicine became my only love. Until it wasn't. 2 years later, I met Maxwell at a medical conference in Boston. He was a quiet, thoughtful man, a medical investor who owned a renal center and was scouting for specialists. We bonded over coffee and conversations about the healthcare system. He didn't ask for my story. He gave me space to unfold at my own pace. And slowly. I did. He didn't try to fix me. He listened. When I told him about James, the pregnancy, the complications, the betrayal, he didn't flinch. He simply held my hand and said, "I don't care what your past looks like. I only care about what our future could be." And that was the first time in years I allowed myself to imagine a future again. We married 2 years later, a quiet ceremony. His mother hugged me like I was her own. My father, once stiff and stern, wept when he walked me down the aisle. After our wedding, he asked me to take charge and manage his renal center. We didn't rush anything. We took our time, and then, the miracle happened. I got pregnant. The doctors couldn't explain it. After years of irregular cycles, scarred walls, and hormonal imbalances, they had quietly prepared me for a life without children. But one day, I felt different. I took a test. And this time, the 2 lines brought joy, not terror. I had a son. And 2 years later, I was expecting a baby girl. My life, the one James said I couldn't have, was unfolding before me in color. I had love. I had family. I had peace. And then, it happened. It was supposed to be a routine day. The hospital was quiet, unusually so. The morning shift had just ended, and most of the patients were settled in. I was in my office reviewing charts when my assistant, Mia, knocked softly and stepped in. "Dr. Vera, you got a new case in your email. International referral. Looks like it's high priority." "From where?" I asked, not looking up. "Melbourne, Australia." I paused. That word still had a sting to it, faint but familiar. I gave a tight smile. "All right, thanks. I'll look at it." She nodded and left. I reached for my iPad and opened my email, and my fingers froze as I read the biodata of the patient. Patient name, James. Referred for, advanced renal insufficiency. Traveling with spouse. Requires specialist evaluation. I read the name again. Then I looked at the photograph attached to the top right corner of the form. My heart skipped a beat, not from pain, but from sheer disbelief. It was him. Older, yes. A little puffier in the face. His hairline had thinned slightly. But it was James. I stared at the picture for a long moment, everything inside me going still. My mind, usually sharp and efficient, was suddenly flooded with memories I had buried under layers of healing. The man who once kissed my tears now had his life in my hands. I slowly closed the file, exhaled deeply, and whispered aloud, "Well, look at God." That evening, I got home and watched my son play with his toys on the living room carpet. Maxwell was in his study. My baby girl kicked gently in my womb as I placed my hand across my belly. I looked around at the life I had, not perfect, but peaceful. Whole. Fulfilling. A far cry from what James said I'd never have. It was almost poetic. For years, I had imagined scenarios where I'd run into him again. But I never, not even in my wildest daydreams, imagined he'd walk into my hospital, as my patient. It wasn't just karma. It was divine choreography. The day of the appointment arrived. I wore my white coat like armor and walked into the consultation room, heart steady, smile polite. When I opened the door, I saw them both. James. And his wife. She was beautiful, slender, soft-eyed, maybe in her early 30s. Her hand rested gently on his arm. He was seated, head bowed, flipping through a medical information packet. When he looked up and saw me, the color drained from his face. His lips parted. But no words came out. I stood there calmly, taking in the stunned silence. I could feel his gaze drop to my belly, swollen, obvious. Then to my ID tag, Dr. Vera N. Maxwell, consultant nephrologist. The silence stretched. "Hello, Mr. James," I said, professionally. "I'm Dr. Vera Maxwell. I'll be overseeing your case." His eyes widened. "Vera," I gave a polite nod. "Yes. It's been a while." His wife looked between us, clearly confused. He stood up slowly, still staring. I didn't know it would be you. I smiled faintly, gesturing for him to sit back down. Life is full of surprises, isn't it? His wife leaned forward. You two know each other? I looked directly at her, then at James, and said in the calmest, most surgical tone, yes. We were very close once. A long time ago. James looked like he wanted the earth to open and swallow him. I, on the other hand, felt nothing but clarity. I opened the file, flipping through lab reports. Let's begin. For the next 20 minutes, I explained his condition, treatment options, potential outcomes. I spoke like the seasoned doctor I was. Kind but firm. Thorough but emotionally distant. I didn't look at James longer than I needed to. I treated him like I would any patient, with professionalism and detachment. His wife took notes while he sat frozen, barely breathing. At the end of the consultation, I closed the file and said, "We'll begin tests tomorrow. My team will coordinate with the transplant unit." As they stood to leave, James looked at me again. "Vera, can we talk privately?" I didn't even blink. "I'm afraid I have other patients to attend to. If you have any questions, you can reach out to the renal coordinator." His lips parted again, trying to find a space to squeeze regret into professionalism. But I didn't let him. I turned to his wife. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Mrs. James. I'll see you both tomorrow." And then I walked out, head held high, heart pounding not with pain, but with power. That night, I cried in the shower. Not from sorrow, but from release. 8 years of pain. 8 years of wondering if I'd ever heal. And here I was, whole, expectant, fulfilled. And him? The man who left me for being barren. Now clinging to a wife and a prayer, in my hospital. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. And I was no longer the girl who begged him to stay. I was the woman he'd never forget. James came to every appointment on time. He sat quietly in the examination room, eyes never quite meeting mine. His wife, Diana, did most of the talking, polite, respectful, and clearly concerned. She took notes diligently, asked intelligent questions, and never once betrayed suspicion, even when James looked like he was drowning in guilt. I answered all her questions professionally. I explained his test results in clear detail. I adjusted his medication regimen. I ordered the necessary scans and liaised with the transplant team. But when James spoke to me, which was rare, I responded with the same level of politeness I reserved for strangers on elevators. Because that's what he was now, a stranger I used to love. He tried to talk to me several times after our first meeting. "Vera, can I have a minute? Dr. Maxwell, please. Just one moment." I declined every time. Each refusal wasn't loud or angry, just quiet and final. Once, after an early morning session, I was walking down the corridor when he caught up to me, out of breath. "Vera, please. I just want to say something." I turned to him slowly, hand on my clipboard, belly rounding out beneath my lab coat. "You're not my patient, James. You're my case. And I treat all my cases with care. That's all there is to it." He stood there stunned. I didn't wait for a reply. One day, I brought my son to the hospital. He had a mild allergic reaction and needed to see the pediatrician. Maxwell was out of town, so I came with him. We were walking past the waiting area heading to my office when I heard my name. Vera. It was James. He was seated alone. His wife must have stepped out. His eyes dropped to my son, full of life, with Maxwell's dimples and my eyes. That's your son? I nodded, smiling softly at my boy, who clung to my hand. James swallowed hard. He looks like you. I looked at him then, really looked at him. There were tears in his eyes. But not the kind that ask for pity, the kind that come from realization. From regret. He sat there speechless, staring at the living proof of what he once said I'd never have. I walked away without saying another word. During one of his final treatment rounds, I walked into the room with his updated test results. Diana was there. James looked pale but stable. The atmosphere was quiet. Your numbers have improved, I said, handing her the chart. We've delayed the transplant assessment for now. You're responding well to conservative management. Diana beamed. That's such good news. Thank you, Dr. Maxwell. James didn't speak. I left, but Diana walked behind me. She reached out and touched my arm gently. She took a breath. I know this is unusual, but I've been meaning to talk to you. Woman to woman. I stood back, watching her closely. There was no resentment in her eyes. Only weariness. Sadness. Maybe even shame. He told me everything, she began. I'm not here to defend James. I'm not even here to speak for him. I'm here because I needed to meet the version of you that still existed. Because he talks about you more than he realizes. I raised an eyebrow. Does he? She nodded. Not directly. But every time he mentions Atlanta, or Nigeria, or law school, your name slips in. Quietly. Like a ghost that never left. I just wanted to say thank you. For helping him even after everything. Her words were like warm water on old wounds. He's lucky you were the one to open that file, she added. Anyone else might not have been as professional as you. I gave her a small nod. I didn't do it for him. She tilted her head. Why, then? I met her eyes, kind, searching, sincere. For me, I replied. And for my peace. James' treatment lasted 3 weeks. 3 long weeks of watching a man I once loved reduced to fragments of himself, older, thinner, haunted. The sparkle that once made me fall for him back in the university was gone. In its place was silence, regret, and the constant weight of, what if? He never tried to speak again. Not beyond polite hellos or answering my clinical questions. Maybe he sensed that the door between us had been sealed shut, not with hate, but with time. And time, I had learned, was more final than death. His wife, Diana, often sat by his side, reading to him, praying quietly, holding his hand. She reminded me so much of who I used to be, before the heartbreak, before the pain, before the scar tissue around my womb and heart had hardened into something strong, something unbreakable. The day of his discharge came quietly. No grand goodbyes. No tears. Just the slow, tired movement of a man going back into a life that would never again look the same. But before he left, he asked to see me. I agreed. He stood in the garden courtyard just outside the hospital's east wing, the place where patients often went to breathe a little fresh air before re-entering the chaos of their lives. He was thinner than ever, leaning on a cane. Diana sat on a bench nearby, giving us space but still present, a silent witness to the last page of our chapter. I stood a few feet from him. He turned to me, voice gravelly. I don't deserve it, but I needed to say thank you. I nodded. You're welcome. He looked down, then back at me. And I'm sorry. For what I did. For how I broke you. There was pain in his voice. Real pain. But also release. I looked at him, not as the man who had crushed me, but as the man who had once loved me the only way he knew how. You didn't break me, I said softly. You bent me. But I bent back. He nodded. A tear slid down his cheek, and he didn't wipe it away. You have a beautiful family, he whispered. Yes, I replied. Yes, I do. There was a moment of silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Then I spoke, finally and completely. You were my first love, James. But not my only love. And that saved me. He nodded again, like he knew it, like he had known it for years but needed to hear it out loud to let go. Goodbye, Vera, he said. Goodbye, James. He turned and walked slowly toward his wife, who rose and took his arm. She looked at me once, just once, and gave a small nod. A thank you. A farewell. A closure. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the Atlanta skyline, I sat on the balcony of our home, wrapped in my husband's arms. Our son was asleep, and the tiny movements inside my belly reminded me that life still unfolded, gently, persistently, beautifully. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it no longer did. James had been my storm once. But now? Now, I was the sky after it. Clear. Wide. Endless. I closed my eyes and whispered into the dusk, I am whole. The end.